Okay, we're going to look at the question this week about red strings, Kabbalah strings. Are they valid? Do they have a kosher source? Are they a real Jewish tradition, or is it some made-up thing? You can get them now online. Target sells them for $29.95. You can get them. You can get them for a couple of shekels at the Kotel. If you go to the Western Wall, there's usually people there begging for money, and if you give them some charity, they'll give you a red string. So, where's this from? Is it a kosher thing? Is there a source for it? And what does it do? What's it for? The way it's presented is that these red strings are there as a protection from the evil eye. That if you wear them, then you'll be blessed and you'll be protected. If you don't wear them, then you're vulnerable to what's called the evil eye, the ayin hara. What's the evil eye? The evil eye is the idea that jealous looks. If somebody looks at you jealously, or they see you're being successful and they don't like it, so their negative look at you, that itself could actually impact you negatively, and you may lose your success or your blessings or whatever it is. That thoughts count. Thoughts have a power. And when somebody has a bad thought about you, even though it's unjustified, it's unfair, it's none of their business, but they've created a certain energy that could impact you negatively as well. These red strings are supposed to be a protection from that. And so people often will look at their lives and say, yeah, I think I do have an evil eye, because nothing seems to be going right. And so they're willing to try anything. So why not wear a red string? Doesn't ask much of you. Maybe $29.95, but not much more than that. And you wear it and you're protected. So we have to look into this, because it's not a mitzvah. There's definitely no commandment in the Torah to wear a red string. It doesn't say that anywhere. It doesn't say anywhere such an idea. In the Talmud it's not mentioned. So how could this be a Jewish custom? Maybe it's picked up from some Babylonian custom, Zoroastrian.
The Decorim.
That's a different story. Yeah, there's mentions of red strings here and there, but not to wear them to protect you from the evil eye. So, generally speaking, if there's a Jewish custom, it should have a Jewish source. There should be somewhere in the Torah, in the Talmud, in the Kabbalistic writings, somewhere that says to do this. If it doesn't,
Ayin Hara somewhere in the Torah?
Ayin Hara is also not explicitly in the Torah, but it's throughout the Talmud. It's in our prayers in the Siddur. We pray that we should be protected from the Ayin Hara. So that's definitely a Jewish thing. But how to be protected from it? By putting a red string on? How does that help? So the tricky thing is there are not many sources on this, but there are some. And if you dig up and look, there are a few places that this thing is spoken about, the idea of a red string. The first place that's most often quoted, the earliest actual written discussion of a red string, is in what's called the Tosefta. Tosefta is printed the back of volumes of the Talmud, and the Tosefta is the teachings of the Talmudic rabbis, the rabbis of the time of the Mishnah. So it's pre-Gemara, it's before the Gemara was put together, but those teachings are sometimes quoted in the Gemara and sometimes not. So it's parallel teaching to a Mishnah, but not as authoritative as a Mishnah. Mishnah and Talmud are authoritative halachic sources, the beginnings of Jewish law, whereas Tosefta was other sources that were not always included, but sometimes quoted in the Talmud.
Is it like Brisa?
But it's similar to a Brisa, yeah. So the Tosefta in Tractate Shabbos, chapters 7 and 8, there's two mentions of a red string, and they're a bit contradictory. It's listing there what's called Darkei Emori. Darkei Emori means the ways of the Emorites, the Emorite nation that lived in the area of the land of Israel. They had many superstitious and idolatrous customs, and the Jewish people, because they were neighbors, were exposed to their customs. So the Tosefta goes through a list of various things that are called Darkei Emori. There are the Emorite superstitions that we should not do. And one of the things it lists is that somebody who ties a red string around their finger. If you tie a red string around your finger, that's an Emorite custom that should be avoided. We don't do that. Okay? That is pretty clear, but it says around the finger. The red string around the finger. It doesn't say around your ankle, around your wrist, around your finger. That's an Emorite custom. Later, then, in the next chapter of the Tosefta, the same Tosefta, it says that if you tie a string, and then there's two textual versions of what it says next. If you tie a string on red, or of red on his hand. right? So there's actually two textual versions of this. So it's not clear. Different manuscripts that say differently. One says if you tie on red, meaning if you've got an injury, if you've got a redness, if you've got a mark on your body and you tie something on it. Or another version of it is that if you tie red string on your hand. So either a string on red or a string of red on your hand. There are two opinions whether that's okay or not. Rabbi Tzadok says it's forbidden. That's the ways of the Emorites. Whereas Rabban Gamliel says it's permissible. You're allowed to do that. So the Tosefta itself, that's often quoted against red strings, is not so clear. A red string around the finger is definitely an Emorite custom. We can't do that. But tying a red string on your hand is debated. Rabbi Tzadok says it is forbidden. It's an Emorite thing. Rabban Gamliel says no, that's fine. That's not an Emorite custom. So you can't really use this Tosefta as a conclusive proof either way, because it definitely does not clearly forbid it or clearly allow it. It maybe has a debate on it. That's the most you could say about it. Now what's interesting is that this Tosefta is not quoted in the later halachic works. The Talmud goes through Emorite customs based on what the Tosefta says. There are many things the Tosefta lists as being forbidden. This one is missed out. The Talmud does not mention it. And the Beis Yosef, who's the author of the Shulchan Aruch, Rabbi Yosef Karo, who lived in the 1500s, he writes in his work, Beis Yosef, halachic work, that any thing that is not listed in the Talmud as an Emorite custom, even if it is listed in the Tosefta, it's not binding. It's not considered halachically the conclusion, because there are many things he says that are listed as Emorite customs that we do, but they're listed in the Tosefta, not in the Talmud. If the Talmud didn't quote it, it means the Talmud rejected that opinion, and therefore it's permissible. So the fact that the Talmud does not list a red string as being an Emorite custom suggests that the Talmud rejects that opinion, and therefore it's not Emorite, and you could do it. If we come to that conclusion, all we've concluded is that you can do it, but should you do it? Is it a valid thing? Just because you can, should you? Does it mean anything? Does it come from anywhere? So a very interesting source that is often quoted in support of the red string is the responsa of Reb Moshe Stern. Reb Moshe Stern was a rabbi in the city of Debrecen in Hungary, and then later in Brooklyn in the last century, not in recent times. And he writes, this is a letter that he wrote. I gave you a copy of it. This is a letter that he wrote in response to a bunch of halachic questions from somebody, and this was in the year Toshin Lamed Hey, 1975. He was in Brooklyn at the time, and because of the fascinating nature of many of the questions, I'll copy the whole thing. One of them is about red string, but we'll do all of them because they're very interesting. So at the top there, Nishalti sheish sheilas v'dinim v'harin meishiv loy al kol sheilas sheshadalon tshuva ma'ala. So I've been asked 6 questions. He's responding, and I'm going to answer you on all 6 I give you a response with love and good wishes. The first question was Shaila Aleph. Im yesh mokol aminik shalei laniach lahabed yeled b'mareh terem she'ischilu shino lotzes. Is there a source for the custom to not allow a baby to look in the mirror until the baby grows his teeth? Ever heard of that one? Yeah. To not show the baby the mirror until they've heard. So is there a source for this?
Is this called superstition? Like
that's the question.
These things?
Is this superstition? Superstition is forbidden. If it's just a superstitious thing, you can't do it. But is there some mystical source for it? Is there a reason for it? Is there something about it? So that's the question. Because if it's just superstition, that means it's borrowed from some other tradition, somewhere else. So Heshafti, my answer is Ken Hayaminik. That indeed was the custom. Vanoshim Hayamakpidas Azeh Ma'od. And particularly the women were very careful about this, to not show their babies the mirror till they've grown their teeth. I know that in my parents' house they were strict on this, and also in my in-laws' house they were strict on this. Until the child started speaking and the teeth started growing, they would not let the child look in the mirror. Because they would say that if you do show the child his own reflection in the mirror, then the teeth won't grow in time, and the child won't speak when they're supposed to speak. So he says it doesn't give a source for it. He says, I know that was the custom. That's what they did. It's definitely a valid tradition, That's what he says.
Valid tradition.
If people do it, holy people do it, so then that is. Now we'll see later why that is itself a source. The second one. What about the custom to not walk over a child, a baby? You heard of that one as well? To step over a baby. People generally, or babies specifically. Yeah. So Hishafti, that was indeed the custom from old times. Everyone would be careful not to walk over a child. You can't pass over a child, you can't jump over a child. And I remember, he says from my childhood, that if somebody did walk over a child, he'd have to go back over the child, or jump back over. The opposite of what he did the first time. Yeah. So if you walked over, you have to walk back. If you jumped over, you have to jump back. That's what I remember. And they would say that if you walk over a child, they won't grow fully, they won't develop fully, and the only way to reverse it was to go back the same way. Again, he says, I saw it, it was definitely a custom. Now, the third one he asks is on the bottom of the page. Shaila im yesh makar laminig likshar chut shani mipnei ein hara ala tinok am veglosa ukyotze bezeh. Is there a custom, or is there a source for the custom to tie a red string against the evil eye, either on the child or on the child's crib? Is there or similar? Is there such a thing? So Shafti ken oyamidig. So my answer is indeed that was the custom. Vakol osaken, and everyone used to do it. In his, back in Hungary, that everyone used to do that. Ken ditku likshor chut shani adam ala agola or mitas etinoik. They would either tie it on the pram or on the bed of the child, to ward off the evil eye. And these three things we've mentioned, not looking in the mirror, a child look in the mirror, not passing over a child, or tying the red string, all three of these come under the category of what's called minig noshim zikanis, the custom of old women. Old women's customs, the grandmother's customs. And about them, it sounds like a derogatory term. No. She'aleim kosev Rashba. The Rashba, who was Shmuel ben Maderes, one of the great sages of Spain in the 13th century, he said about that, Sha'al yizalzlu b'divrei, top the next column. You should never belittle the words of the grandmothers, of minhagim, and all their customs. Ki bavada yisudosim b'hari kodesh, because certainly their source is in holy places. Gam im nelum hatam imenu, even if the reasoning is hidden from us. So the Rashba, who is a halachic authority, says that what the grandmothers did has to be taken seriously. Not what every grandmother does and everything they do, but if the general custom amongst the grandmothers was, you've got to be careful about this, don't belittle it or dismiss it, because they certainly have a holy source. It comes from a holy place, even if we don't understand why.
That's why in Yiddish they have this called Bobbe Maises.
Yeah. So is there a difference between a Bobbe Maises and a custom?
It's different.
And a Bobbe Minhag?
Well, that's the thing. But a Bobbe Maisa is saying things that the Bobbes did has to be taken seriously. You can't dismiss it. And superstition or full, if you sometimes you find that there's a wrong source for something. Okay, that might be different. Sometimes customs creep in to the Jewish community that come from elsewhere that are not valid. But until you find such a thing, just because you didn't find a source, if the only source is this is what the grandmothers did, that's a good source. Because the Rashba, halachic authority, said, be very respectful of the customs of the grandmothers, because they come from holy place.
So if one grandmother did it, wasn't enough?
No, not just one. Yeah, it had to be the grandmothers in general.
Okay.
So, the next three questions we won't look at for now. Just out of interest, I'll tell you what they are. He asks about children. How long do little kids have to wait between milk and meat? If the little child have to wait 6 hours, whatever. So he says that until age 3, you don't have to be careful about it, and discusses it at length. He said another question he was asked by the same person was that the person who heard that pregnant women should not knit. Pregnant women shouldn't knit. That's what he heard, and he says I never heard of that one. Sorry, even the grandmothers didn't say that one. And then finally he asked about making the blessing mazonos on bread, mazonos rolls, which he doesn't like and rejects.
How
So anyway.
women and the nails
Sorry?
I heard nails and pregnant women, you have to be careful.
Oh, that's
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 from
something
Kabbalah.
that the Talmud says that the fingernails you have to be careful of, not leave them lying around, that type of thing. Yeah, and there are many things about pregnant women. So, but knitting, I never heard that one. So this Ramosha Stern, he's a halachic authority, and he brings here halachic basis to say that the red string was done by everybody. It's a holy custom based on what the Rashba says, that you have to take grandmothers seriously in their customs.
Any red string.
Oh, he doesn't give any details about what the red string should be, what it should be made of. There's no details here. But he says, but whatever the grandmothers say, that's what you should do.
Basically, yeah.
So definitely, just this is enough. Already you have a contemporary halachic authority who can be relied on, who says that the red strings is a holy custom. So anyone who just rejects it as being Bobbe Maises in the negative sense, there is a very respectable source to say otherwise. You can't be so dismissive of it. The question is there any understanding why the red string should have any meaning? Because the Rashba's statement that we should take seriously the grandmother's customs is not halachically accepted by all. There were other authorities who said that no, if a custom is irrational, if it doesn't have any meaning, if it doesn't have any explanation to it, then you don't have to accept it until there's some explanation. There were other authorities. The Rashba didn't say that. The Rashba said even if we have no understanding of it, if the grandmothers did it, it's holy. Others say no, it's got to make some sense. So the question is, can we make some sense, at least even on a spiritual level, to why the red string? What's particularly powerful about the red string? So, first of all, the color red does Kabbalistically have a certain power, and that is described in the sources. There's one source from the Munkacher Rebbe, who wrote a sefer called Divrei Torah. The Munkacher, Rabbi Chaim Elazar Shapira, who lived pre-war Hungary, he writes that Al Pi Kabbalah, according to the Kabbalists, the color red has a power to deflect the evil eye. The color red generally. He's not talking about specifically about strings, but he talks about the color red has the power to deflect the evil eye.
Don't Spartan use blue?
Blue?
It's from Morocco because they put it on the walls.
For blue, there's a much better source. Blue, it says straight in the Zohar. The Zohar, which is the most foundational book of Kabbalah, says that the color tchelis, which used to be on the tzitzis, that which is a dark blue, that blue has the power to rid the world of the evil eye. So that certainly has a source. Blue has a source. But he says, in Kabbalah it says red as well. That red also has a valid source. And what is that? That the reason he gives a bit of explanation. He says, why would red, particularly as a color, deflect the evil eye? Because in Kabbalah it says that the various supernal energies, each one is represented by a color. And every color in the world has a certain atmosphere or energy towards it. So the power of Gevura, which means the power to expel, to hold back, to discipline, that power is represented by the color red. Red is the color of Gevura. And so red is like a boundary. It's a color that stops. It's interesting that red is the red light that stops. Is it red? Why is the red light, what does that mean, stop? Why are stop signs in red? Is it just because we're used to it? Or is it because the color red itself has an alarming holding back property to it? According to Kabbalah, red lights have to be red. They couldn't be green. You couldn't switch it around. Because red itself means stop. It means gevura. It means holding back. And so there's something innate about the red light. And that's why internationally red lights mean the same thing. We speak different languages, but we all have the same red lights. So therefore he says that the power of red is the power to hold back negativity. A holy gevura. So there is, therefore, already, we've got some basis for redness. But that's not enough to say red strings, because you could say, okay, red socks, I'll wear a red tie, why a red string particularly? And what is the story of these strings? So, fascinatingly, there is a source that discusses directly the red strings and gives us much more detail about it. It's on the Hebrew, I actually copied it for you. This is a letter written by a rabbi by the name of Rabbi Avram Chaim Danziger. Rabbi Avram Chaim Danziger was the son of the Alexander Rebbe. Alexander was a huge Hasidic group before the war, possibly the biggest. They say that it could have been even bigger than Ger before the war. Ger was a very big one in Poland, but Alexander, there was a city Alexander, and the Alexander Hasidic group was one of the biggest. Had a huge following. And so this Rabbi Avram Chaim Zanziger was the son of the Alexander Rebbe. He would have lived in the first half of the 20th century, and this letter was probably written. It didn't have a date on it where I found it. It could have been in the 30s or the 40s or the 50s, something like that. Sometime in the first half of the last century. So he is writing. It says here, Kvod Ahuvi Yidid Nafshi Hayakar. He says to my dear, my beloved, Harav Asher Zelig Margolius Neri Yoyer. He's addressing this letter to a rabbi called Rav Asher Zelig Margolius, who was a very well-known Kabbalist in Jerusalem. Rav Asher Zelig Margolius, he authored quite a few books, a well-known person. So he's writing to him this letter, and in the letter he writes, Gama Vakshay, Ki Yira no lahaskiras achoyse yokar tzipora leia basara rivka Asher. Asher Baruch Hashem al roiv chasadav shenis abra v'zeh yud beishonav adayin lo nifkada achar chasna. So he writes like this: Please, I want you to pray for my sister, my dear sister, Tzipora Leah, the daughter of Sarah Rivka, who Baruch Hashem, thank God, with all of His kindness, has made her pregnant. That Hashem has given her pregnancy. She has been 12 years married, and had not become pregnant until now, and now she's been blessed that she's pregnant. So please, Rabbi Avram Chaim is asking Rabbi Asher Zelig, his friend, please daven for her in the holy places in Israel. Go to the holy places to daven for her. Pray that she should complete her pregnancy benekel smoothly, without any mishaps, God forbid. And she should give birth to a living and healthy child. And because of ayin hara, it's still a secret. What does he mean? That we haven't told anyone she's pregnant, as is the custom, in order not to arouse the ayin hara, the negative eye, that a pregnancy is not announced in the early stages. There are various different customs as to when it should be announced. In Chabad circles, the custom is that for the first 4 months, until entering the fourth month, not to speak about it at all, and not to publicize it until the 5th month. That's our custom. But there's a general custom, and this is something that's quite widespread, not to talk about it in the early stages at all. Why? Because of ayin hara, an evil eye. You don't want somebody saying, "Oh, you're pregnant," and with any negative feeling, and that could cause anything negative. So he's saying, I haven't told anyone, but in a letter to his friend in Israel, he's saying, if you can daven in the holy places for her, that would be appreciated. That's the first paragraph. Now he continues. Va'ata. And now further. Avakshay la'asher ki yodanu mekvod kedushas dodenu Rabbeinu Agodash Bal Yisrach Yisrael Zatzal. Now, if you could help me with another thing, I've got another request. It's well known from my uncle, the Yismach Yisrael, who was the Alexander Rebbe, one of the Alexander Rebbe's, skula lazeh, that there's a skula, a blessing for a pregnant woman, that limdod kever Rachel imenu aleh shalom, the limdod kever shel Rachel, v'shloyach li abendlech, to measure out kever Rachel, Rachel, our mother's gravesite. Measure it out, meaning to take something to measure it, to put around the kever. So I'm asking you, please, can you do this? Go around kever Rachel, v'shloyach li abendlech, and send me the strings. Bendelech means the bracelets. Laman yiyeh l'skula shetashlam yom herona, in order that it should be a blessing for my sister that she should complete her pregnancy safely. So he asking him, can you take a string, put it around kever Rachel, and then send it to me, and that will be a protection for my sister. And he's saying this in the name of the Yismach Yisrael, the Alexander Rebbe, that he used to say such a thing. So, as is known, that the real authentic red strings are not just any old red string, it has to be a red string that has been put around kever Rachel, around Rachel's tomb. And so, here is a clear source, quoting a very holy source, Yismach Yisrael, Alexander Rebbe, that's where it's from, that such a custom, or that he knew about the custom. Not that he made it up, but he was aware of it. And then he says, Gamula yesh oid segula lazeh. Maybe you have another skula, another blessing. In Yerushalayim, maybe there's other stuff that you do. Anything, we'll take anything. But the main thing is to keep it secret, and that we're not announcing this pregnancy. It's an amazing thing. 12 years after the wedding, at a time when they didn't have all the medical intervention that we have now, it's quite an amazing thing. So keep it a secret and keep it quiet. And he also asks about if you could tell me about the olive oil from Meron, because things haven't got better for me yet. So it sounds like he'd already asked for another blessing, this special olive oil from Meron, this is where Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai is buried. Things haven't worked yet, so maybe you can tell me what the story is. So, there's some background to there that we don't know. And he signs an AC Didai over the coast of the Chibazan Rav and Matzapli Yeshua B'Sochal Yisrael. So I sign your friend, your beloved, who writes to you in a rush, waiting for the redemption to come for the entire Jewish people. And he should be able, he's writing just before Shavuos, and so he says you should receive the Torah with joy and purity of heart. Signed by Avram Chaim ben Rav HaKodesh Alexander. So this source is quite unique, because here we have a written source quoting a tzaddik about the red string. But also, it doesn't say red string here, it doesn't mention the color red, but it does mention the idea of wrapping around Kever Rachel, meaning that just any red string wouldn't help. But combining the redness that we know from the Divrei Torah of the Munkacher with Alexander saying you have to wrap it around, so we're starting to piece together the sources that there is such a thing, that there is such a basis to it. The question is, why on earth would a string wrapped around somebody's grave have a protection against the Ayin Hara, the evil eye? Like what's the connection? You know, you're wrapping it out, and only Rachel, specifically Rachel, nobody else's grave. There are other very holy people buried in Israel, only Rachel's grave. Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Sarah, no one else. So it's explained that there is a possible reason why Rachel particularly is connected to defending against the evil eye. Because Rachel Emenu, Rachel, our mother, she did an amazing thing. She was the one who we know that Yaakov fell in love with and wanted to marry. And at the last minute, her father switched under the chuppah and put her sister Leah instead of Rachel. Now, Jacob already suspected that this might happen. And so he'd made up with Rachel certain signs to know that he was marrying the right woman. Leah was going to the chuppah, and she spoke to Rachel and said, I'm really sorry. Rachel could have said something, stopped her, protested, done something to stop her, but she didn't. Not only she didn't, she actually told Leah the signs that Jacob would ask in order that she should not become embarrassed and disgraced, that she doesn't know what's going on, and Leah would have a terrible time. She gave up the love of her life, her soulmate. She let her sister marry him. She actually enabled it. She joined in with it, which is an unbelievable thing. That's exactly the opposite of Ayin Hara. Ayin Hara, the evil eye, is jealousy, is seeing somebody else get something and you want it, and you feel bad that they have it. The opposite of that is Rachel, who what was really hers, was really the man that she was supposed to marry, and she allowed her sister to marry him and did not have any evil feelings towards her. She did not have any bad feelings towards her. And this continued the rest of their life. We know in the end Rachel also married Jacob, but never did Rachel have any ill feeling towards Leah, any bad feelings towards her, or look at her negatively whatsoever, even though she had made Rachel into the second class, or the second wife. So what better antidote could there be to the Ayin Hara, the evil eye, than to connect to Rachel, who had such a good eye, the positive eye? And indeed, that's sort of the message here as well, that you're safe from the evil eye if you have a good eye. And that's brought, there are authentic sources for that one, that if you want to be protected from the evil eye, have a good eye, look at other people positively. Huh? What does it say? One of the positive traits is Ayin Tov, is to have a good eye. But specifically, it wards off the evil eye. If you have a good eye on others, if you look at other people's success and happy for them, sincerely happy for them, without any jealousy, so then the evil eye can't get you, because you're not in that. You're not involved in that. If you're not involved in the evil eye, it can't get you at all. So that would definitely be a more surefire protection for the evil eye, would be to have a good eye. But one of the ways to remind us of that, maybe, one of the ways to inspire us, is to be connected to Rachel. And so the red string wrapped around her grave is a protection against the evil eye. And you could even say, perhaps, that it has a logical base. The color red is the color of deflection, of gevura, of self-control, and the connection with Rachel is a good eye as opposed to an evil eye. So it's not just what the grandmothers believed in without any logic to it. It could actually have some spiritual logic to it as well. But the red eye, the red string protects us from the evil eye. So therefore, it's definitely a valid custom. All right.